You know, over the past few weeks, I've been thinking a lot about this sermon series on anger. And I've really been hit by the fact that getting angry is just something we all do, and we all do it a lot. Frankly, I don't know if it's genetic or cultural, if it has more to do with our nature or the way we've been nurtured. I just don't know. What does seem clear is that we all get angry from time to time, and sometimes it seems to come from out of nowhere. For example, this past Monday's my day off, I was home with Maggie, and I noticed that Coco, our pit bull, had grabbed one of Maggie's socks. Now, Coco has no real need for socks, at least not just one. And she had it in her mouth, for crying out loud. And so, being a responsible pet owner, I reached over to take it away from her. And when I did, she growled at me. Now, it's important for you to know, I was raised in what you could call a yelling house. Although my mom and dad were great, and my brother and sister and I were loved, and we knew it, my parents tended to be yellers. In other words, yelling, or as we would say down south, hollering, was the preferred way to express most negative emotions, particularly anger. And so when I heard Coco growl, I immediately had this flashback to Moose Avenue in Norfolk, Virginia. And before thinking, I let loose. Now, to be clear, there was no hitting. There was no cussing. And there wasn't even a derogatory reference to Coco's relationship with her mother, her lineage, which would have been completely appropriate given the situation. But there was a very loud no. And not only did Coco drop the sock, she did something I've only seen her do during a thunderstorm. She started to shake. Yikes. A moment of silence. And then Maggie, in her own teenage way, took the next step. She said, I know how she feels. I used to be afraid of you too when you got mad, but I'm not anymore. I felt like a psychopath. Of course, if I had actually listened to the message I shared last week, and that was on Monday, that was just the day before, I'd have known exactly what to do. I would have paused before I brought down the thunder. I mean, since anger is an emotion that just happens, I don't think it's something we control. Therefore, I would have gotten mad. What we can control and what I could control is what we do about it, what I did about it. And if I had paused, I wouldn't have sounded like a psycho. And I wouldn't have created an issue that was bigger than a dog with a sock. And I wouldn't have caused my daughter to confess that during her formative years, she lived in fear. My gosh. Maybe next time I should what? Think before I speak. Something that we talked about last week. And this morning we're going to look at what I think you could call the next step. That when we're calm, it may be important for us to express the anger we feel. But only after we're calm. And I've got to tell you, looking back at our cultural and social history, even our political history, I think we have a wonderful example of someone who did this very thing remarkably well. And of course, I'm talking about Herman Munster. I mean, Herman could get really mad. Like when he tried out for the Dodgers and the players walked off the field. Or when Grandpa changed his voice so that he couldn't sing folk songs anymore. Or when called upon to offer his opinion of our governmental system. I'm telling you, Herman could get mad. But a little later, generally in less than 30 minutes, after he had calmed down and thought about it, he could be downright philosophical. Now that was Herman Munster. And I'll tell you, the same thing can apply to us. You see, once we've taken that pause and calmed ourselves down, it's at this point that we can express what made us angry to start with, if that's necessary. And you know, even though there are plenty of situations when we can follow the example of Elsa and just what? Let it go. There are also times when our anger really needs to be expressed. As a matter of fact, this was something that Jesus told his disciples about, and through them, us. According to Matthew, Jesus said, "If one of my followers sins against you, go and point out what was wrong, but do it in private between the two of you. If that person listens, you have won back a follower. But if that person refuses to listen, take along one or two others. The scriptures teach that every complaint must be proven true by two or more witnesses. If the follower refuses to listen to them, report the matter to the church. Anyone who refuses to listen to the church must be treated like an unbeliever or a tax collector." You see, Jesus understood that for a community to function, feelings needed to be expressed, especially those that weren't warm and fuzzy. And I'll tell you, when you think about it, that just makes sense. For example, if we decide to push our anger down, just push it down, and just let it fester down there, that emotion isn't going to vanish, right? It's not going to just go away. Instead, it's going to eat at us, right? And as a result, something that could have been dealt with painlessly now has acquired a life of its own and has become a lot stronger than it was before. And even if we're able to keep it from dominating our thoughts, keeping us awake at night, causing us to mumble as we're walking around, there's a pretty good chance that all that pent-up anger will start eating little holes in our stomach, and that certainly isn't good. And so for good, solid mental and physical reasons, it just makes sense to get those feelings out as soon as possible. But you know, it's not just about us. If we let those folks with whom we're angry know how we're feeling, we're giving them the chance to clear up what may be a misunderstanding. And if it's not all a big mistake, we may be actually giving them the opportunity to repent and to confess. But even more than that, I think when we share our anger and frustration, we're actually demonstrating a lot of trust, aren't we? I mean, in spite of what happened, we trust those people with whom we were so mad, we trust them enough to be honest, to tell them the truth. In other words, a little bit of intimacy is created when we open up to someone else. Of course, our feelings may be rejected, so when we do it, we're running a risk. But as most married couples know, you can only build strong relationships by being honest and vulnerable and authentic. And who knows, like Jesus said, when we're open, the other person might listen and respond in a way that shows that it's all been worthwhile. I mean, we just might win back a follower. We might win back a brother or sister if we have the guts to share our anger with them. No wonder James wrote this, "My dear friends, you should be quick to listen and slow to speak or to get angry. If you are angry, you cannot do the good things that God wants done." I'm telling you, we can move past both the issues and the feelings when we decide to express our anger, and in my opinion, that's why it's important to do. Of course, how we choose to do it is also important. And again, that just makes sense. My gosh, if we go up to someone where there's already a little bit of bad blood, and we're ranting and raving and acting like a darn fool, it's more likely that we're going to get a punch in the mouth than win back a brother or sister. And Paul knew this. In his letter to the Ephesians, Paul wrote, "Stop being bitter and angry and mad at others. Don't yell at one another or curse each other or ever be rude. Instead, be kind and merciful and forgive others just as God forgave you because of Christ." Now, that's what Paul wrote, and I think that's pretty good advice. But I'll tell you, even better than this, I think he tells us exactly how to do it, exactly how to express our anger. Now, as we read this passage from Paul's first letter to the church in Corinth, I'd like you all to think about how this attitude, this perspective, this decision might affect the words that we use. And I'm talking about when we get really, really mad. This is what he wrote. Love is kind and patient, never jealous, boastful, proud, or rude. Love isn't selfish or quick-tempered. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs that others do. Love rejoices in the truth, but not in evil. Love is always supportive, loyal, hopeful, and trusting. Love never fails. Of course, in this passage, Paul is writing about love, right? But it's not the kind we feel. Rather, it's the kind we do. In other words, it's not about experiencing an emotion, it's about taking an action. You see, this kind of love we can show to folks we don't like, even to people who make us mad. But we've got to decide to do it. And just imagine what would happen when we do. Suppose we decide that instead of being loaded for bear, suppose we decide that we're going to be kind and patient as we express our anger. And no matter how many of our buttons are pushed, suppose we decide that we are not going to be jealous. And we're not going to sound all boastful and proud, and we are sure not going to be rude. In fact, no matter what the other person has done in the past, suppose we decide that we're going to throw away the tally sheet, the record of wrongs that lists all the ways we've been hurt in the past. And suppose we decide that we're not going to let anything get in the way of us being supportive and loyal, hopeful and trusting. That's our priority. In other words, suppose we make the decision, and it is a decision. Suppose we make the decision to love a person whom we probably don't like very much because he makes us mad. Just imagine how that might shape the way we express our anger. Good night, nurse. All of a sudden, we're going to stay focused, aren't we? Because we're not going to let anger distract us and to tempt us to drift to directions we have no business going. But more than that, when we're gentle and kind in our words, I think the defenses on the other side are going to come down a little bit. If they don't feel attacked, then maybe they won't feel defensive. Or worse, to follow that well-known strategy, the best defense is a good offense. Put another way, our kind words may actually diffuse an explosive situation. And I'll tell you, I think that was something that the writer of the Proverbs understood. He wrote, hatred stirs up trouble. Love overlooks the wrongs that others do. A kind answer soothes angry feelings, but harsh words stir them up. Words of wisdom come from the wise, but fools speak foolishness. I'm telling you, when we consider the power and potential of what we say, there's little wonder why Paul would write, but now you must stop doing such things. You must quit being angry, hateful, and evil. You must no longer say insulting or cruel things about others. And stop lying to each other. You have given up your old way of life with its habits. You see, when we express our anger, we can choose to do it in a loving way, and that's exactly how it can be done. Now, as far as I can tell, Coco has forgiven me for yelling so loud. At least she doesn't shake when she's near me. Of course, when Debbie heard about my hollering, she explained that she would have expressed the same thing without yelling. And based on what I know about my wife and her background growing up in a more quiet house, I think she's right. You see, instead of bringing down the thunder, she would have done what we've been talking about this morning. She would have gotten all her anger out in a kind and loving way. And there would have been a lot less shaking and a lot more wagging. And if it works with dogs, who knows, it might work with people too. And next week, we're going to look at something else we might want to consider when we're angry. And I'm talking about getting some exercise. Amen.